Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to our second last day of the Great Lakes road trip. My name's Annie, and I am the Great Lakes Program Outreach Technician. Thank you so much to everybody who entered their questions for our session earlier this morning with Carter from Shawanaga First Nation. As a reminder, you can take your notes in your road trip passport and follow along at hashtag Great Lakes Road Trip 2022. We'll also be taking questions on our Padlet. It is still open, so remember to check out that link that was sent via email to enter your questions for today's guest experts. Today I am here with Maud and Dave from the Canada Centre for Inland Waters. Hello, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. So before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are currently on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today this land is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So why don't we start off with some introductions? Can you tell us a little bit about what you do here at the Canada Centre for Inland Waters and your roles?
Sure. I'll go ahead. So my name is David Marson. I'm a senior fisheries biologist with the Asian Carp program. And so my role is really in leading the field operations component of the program. So organizing where we're sampling, what kind of gears we're using, and coordinating with some of our Great Lakes partners in sampling and surveillance.
And my name is Maud Tremblay, and I'm a biologist with the Asian Carp program as well. And my role is to help prevent Asian carps from becoming established in Canadian waters. And we do that by educating and informing people who live and play around the Great Lakes on how to identify Asian carps and how to prevent them. What they can do if they happen to see an Asian carp, and what impacts they might have if they were to become established here.
Oh, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So why don't we talk about this program? Can you tell us about what is an Asian carp and why do they have a whole program dedicated to them?
Yeah, so Asian carps actually refer to four species, which were brought over to North America in the 1960s and 1970s in order to control pests in aquaculture facilities. So they do a really good job of this because they have voracious appetites, and they unfortunately escaped from the aquaculture facilities and wound up establishing populations in natural watercourses. And in some places where they occur in the US, they outnumber native fishes 10 to 1.
Wow.
So they really quickly overtake an ecosystem and outcompete native fishes. So they pose a huge threat, and we really want to keep them out.
Really interesting. That's a great connection to when we talked to Rebecca at the Invasive Species Center about the idea of introducing a predator to control other populations. So you said there's 4 different species. How can you tell them apart?
Good question.
So I will speak to that, and I might have you turn right around to see some of our examples of the 4 species here. So on the table, we actually have 5 because we have one that is very similar look-alike, the common carp, that is very common in our waterways now. And in that case, that one has that long dorsal fin at the top, where none of the 4 Asian carp species have that. So that's one of our key characteristics to tell them apart. They also have a couple of barbels near the mouth, which we can't see on this individual, but that's something that's a quick and easy way to tell them apart. So all these species, they grow very quickly. They grow large, up to 40 kilograms plus. The black carp is actually the largest of the 4. It can grow up to about 1.5 meters and upwards of 90 kilograms, so very, very large. The others are more 1 meter to 1.5 meters in length, up to about 40 to 45 kilograms. So they're all fish that grow very large. They grow quickly, they reproduce quickly. And to tell them apart, there's a little bit to do with coloration with the grass carp and the black carp being darker. The big head carp on the bottom has more coloration than the silver carp. And there's other characteristics as well, but they're mainly internal, so it's not as obvious seeing them externally. But grass carp, like the name implies, feeds on vegetation, and they have these pharyngeal teeth in the back of the throat that are really meant for shredding up the vegetation that they eat. And so you can see how that looks, I hope. And then the black carp, which feeds on mollusks, needs these small like molar-like teeth that are used for crushing the mussel shells or gastropod shells. And so it's very different and easy to tell them apart based on that. Where the silver and the big head, the way they feed are filter feeders. One feeds on very fine, small organisms in the water and has almost a sponge-like gill raker. And then the big head carp feeds on larger organisms that it filters through these more thread-like rakers. So again, quick and easy to see, but you have to have fish in the hand for those specific characteristics.
Wow, really interesting. Thanks for explaining that. And 90 kilograms, you said. That's probably bigger than a lot of the students who are tuning in today. So that's a big fish. Okay. So are these fish in Ontario and the Great Lakes?
So, of the 4 species, only grass carp have been captured in the Great Lakes since our program started in 2012. And so there are a couple of populations that are reproducing in the eastern basin of Lake Erie in Ohio waters, but there's no evidence of reproduction in Canadian waters. So to date, there have been 29 captured in Canadian waters since of the Great Lakes since the program began. But they've been few and far between, and there's no evidence of reproduction. So we're still very early on that invasion front.
Okay, so that's good news for now.
Yes.
And what is done to prevent them from entering and sort of establishing in this Great Lakes system?
So I will speak to that. I can go on with that as well. So we are working hard to get out with gears that we know are effective in capturing these species. So we go to areas that are known to be attracted to them, either based on the conditions there, the lots of vegetation, lots of food that they would be interested in, or the river conditions are such that it would be suitable for them to reproduce. And so we target them at the appropriate times, go in with gears that we know are effective in capturing them, and we sample the full fish community while we're there. So you can see behind Maud there are photos of the various gear types that we used. Some are meant to target large-bodied fishes, and some are meant to target small-bodied fishes. And so we're really trying to capture everything that's there, and if there are any life stages of Asian carps there, then we remove them. And yeah, that's ultimately the goal of the program, is to find any few that are there and remove them immediately.
If I just can add on, yeah. So we do a ton of field work, and our teams are working very hard to try to capture any grass carp or other species that might be in the Great Lakes. But we also work, as part of our prevention pillar, we also work with partners on both sides of the border to try and educate people, as I mentioned earlier, on how to identify the 4 species that Steve went over, and what to do if you do happen to capture a species of Asian carp. The species you're most likely to capture would be grass carp, and if you do happen to find one, we want people to know how to identify them, and so learn to identify them before you go out fishing. And if you think you might have captured one, to contact the Invading Species Hotline, and put the fish on ice with its head above the ice, and the Invading Species Hotline will let you know what to do next. And yeah, so it's really important. One of the major parts of my job is educating and informing people who work and live around the Great Lakes, and especially recreational water users and anglers, on how to identify the four species and what to do if they catch one.
So that's a theme that I'm hearing about. Collaboration, education are really important
Definitely.
for conservation work. Excellent.
Yes.
So you talked a little bit about what we should do if we happen to come across an Asian carp. Did you want to share anything else about the monitoring, or what happens if one is discovered?
Of course.
Did you want to jump in on that?
I can jump in, sure. So ultimately, yeah, the goal is finding them if they're there. And then our next step, a very important step, is bringing them back to our lab so that we can analyze the specimen. Because it's very important for us to know if they are capable of reproduction or not. So in some cases, fish are intentionally introduced, but they are sterilized fish, and so they are put into waterways to remove aquatic vegetation. And so this can be done in certain states in the United States.
And sterilized.
Yeah, and so they can be sterilized or not. And so it's important for us to know if they are, because if they're capable of reproduction, then that's a much larger threat to our ecosystem. If they're showing up and attempting to reproduce, that's a big deal for us. So we want to know so that we can judge how much additional effort we want to put in. So we take the fish, we bring it to the lab, we have equipment that we can use to determine if the fish is capable of reproduction or not. And then we scale up our response, which is essentially sending our boats and gears out, targeting specific age groups of fish that we're finding. So if it was an adult fish, then we go in and look for additional adult fish. We have the gear types to sample all different life stages, and so we kind of assess based on that situation what we're going to go out and do. But yeah, it's very important for us to respond right away and determine the level of threat and respond accordingly.
Great.
Do you want me to go to the lab?
Thanks. Okay, so we are going to head around in a moment and take a look at some of the really cool stuff that Maud and Dave have set up for us to check out. I did just want to ask one more question. You talked about what we can all do as Ontarians if we do happen to see an Asian carp. Is there anything else that we can do to help prevent the spread of an invasive species?
Yeah, so one of the main things you can do is when you're heading outside, whether it's into a forest or into a lake or a stream, is to learn what species you might encounter when you're there and how to identify them. So that if you do see an invasive species, you know how to report them, and you'll be on the lookout. So that'll help everybody, because there's not just Asian carps, there's lots of other species that are invasive too.
Excellent. Thank you. And if people want to see some in real life, learn about them, do you know where they can go and check out?
Yes, so there's actually an exhibit of Asian carps at the Toronto Zoo, and that's been there for a couple years now, and you can see 3 out of the 4 species. Because Asian carps are illegal to possess live in Canada or in Canadian waters, that's the only place you can see them in Canada.
All right.
So go check it out. That's easy.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to take a look around at some of these different things that are set up around us. I think first Dave's going to take us into the mobile lab. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So we have a mobile response lab. So if we have an event where we need to have people on site, then we can take our lab with us and we can do those assessments of fish very quickly. So if you'd like to follow me, it's not a very far walk, thankfully. Big first step. And so we can see in here we have some of the equipment. I have some examples as well of a fish that was captured in 2020 in Jordan Harbor, and so we brought it back to the lab and we pulled different structures from the fish, and we can use those to actually age the fish and get a better sense of where it originated from and where it might have moved through the Great Lakes. So there's a tiny little bone in this file, and we can do some assessments on that, and it can actually give us a good sense of the river where the fish was born. This piece of equipment, as I mentioned earlier, we're very interested in the reproductive capability of the fish.
Oh.
And so we use this to actually assess the blood from the fish, and that can tell us if the fish has been sterilized or not, so whether it's capable of reproduction or not.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is some of what's in here. We have some additional space in the back if we have people needing to lead the incident. We do follow incident command system, so it's a very organized structure, how we kind of report to individuals and communicate, and so we can run that out of this mobile lab as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for letting us have a sneak peek in the
course.
inner workings. I'll let Christine and you hop out. And then I see something labeled Electro fishing over there. What's that?
So this electrofishing is one of our primary means of sampling. And so the boat is set up with a generator, and it runs through a control box, and electricity is actually pulsed out of the boat. And so out of the anodes at the front, between those anodes and the boat hull, will pulse electricity, and that'll actually attract fish towards the front of the boat. And as they get closer to the boat, they become stunned and immobilized, and so they'll kind of rise to the surface. And we have two netters. We have a couple nets set up, and we have two people standing on the front of the boat, and they will dip net those stunned fish out and put them into a live well in the boat. And once they're removed from that electrified water, they recover very quickly, and we can identify them to species, take some digital photos, and then release them back into the water body. Obviously the native fishes, the community that we want to be there. Any invasives are removed from the system.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay, well, thanks for showing us this.
Of course.
I think we are ready to move into some questions. So I'm just going to pull up what we've got already in our Padlet. And just a reminder, you can use that Padlet link to submit your questions. I can see there's already a couple in here. So our first question is, how long do Asian carp live?
That's a good question. So we've had a mix of ages in the grass carp that we've captured, anywhere from a couple of years up to about 17 years. On average, it's about 15 years for the four species, 15 up to 20.
Okay.
So they're pretty long lived.
Yeah. And another question that someone is wondering is, are they edible?
That's a great question. We actually get asked this question a lot. So they are edible. In their native range, they're a pretty popular food fish. However, here we just don't really want to create a market for them because they cause such huge problems in the ecosystems here. So technically edible, yes. And in some areas of the U.S. where they have become established, they're trying to find things to do with all of the fish because there's just such a huge biomass. And so they are being used and investigated for different cuisines.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, we've got another question in here. Keep them coming, everybody. These are great. Do they hang out in groups or alone? So I guess, are they social or solitary?
That's a very good question. I mean, we have been very lucky in that in our situations we've rarely come across more than one at a time. So there are very few showing up, and so perhaps they are more solitary. In one instance, we caught close to 10 together in one area. So I guess we're still learning on that front. It seems in some areas of the U.S. that where they're capturing them, they are certainly in high concentrations, and so probably a more social fish.
Interesting. So we're still learning a lot about this fish. Wow.
Definitely, yeah. And in their native range, compared to here, there's quite a few behavioral differences. So it's kind of interesting because what you would expect behaviorally where they're from is not necessarily how they behave here. So even just like looking at what their behaviors and I guess goings on are here is quite a bit different.
Wow. So even though they are existing naturally in one space, they're behaving differently maybe here.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. We have a couple more questions here. Are there other groups working to stop Asian carps?
Yes. So we work, I think I said, we work with our partners on both sides of the border.
Right.
So there's quite a few groups in the U.S. that are working to stop them from, for example, getting into the Great Lakes. That's a pretty major effort that's a lot of people are involved in. We work with NGOs as well. I believe last week you visited the Invasive Species Center.
Yes.
They're one of our major partners, along with the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters and the Federation of Ontario Cottages Associations. So, among others, I can't list them all, but
Yes.
so we work with a lot of different organizations. It's important to collaborate. You can get a lot more work done more efficiently by doing that, and also it would be remiss to miss the province of Ontario
Okay.
and Quebec. So everyone's really working together for this shared goal.
Wow, so it's really involved. It takes a lot of collaboration.
Yes.
I know you can see just by what you showed us in the mobile lab and the electro fishing boat and all these pictures. Oh, we saw just earlier today some with nets that look like that when we were talking to Carter, but clearly it is a big job. So that makes sense. Teamwork would be very important.
Yeah, definitely. We have a lot of students that we hire every summer to help us with that because it is a lot of hands-on work. So it's a great experience for people early on in their career to get that hands-on experience and training involved with being out on the water and doing this very important work. So, but yeah, like you said, it's very involved physically, just getting out there and doing all of this sampling.
So speaking on that topic of people who want to get involved, and you mentioned as a career, what would you say someone who's interested in doing this for a career, what kinds of careers are they? What would you sort of recommend they pursue?
Who's taking that one?
Well, there's lots. I mean, I think a lot of the people who work sort of in our program have done fish and wildlife technician diplomas, biology degrees, sometimes advanced degrees in biology. I don't want to recommend a specific school, but
Well, this environmental science.
yeah, environmental science.
But I mean, just being outdoors, right, and getting comfortable with being outside, learning how to identify fishes. That's an important thing for us, and just being, a good team player and being involved, and that's what we, really look for in people that we bring on. And so, yeah, getting, experience with boating, experience with fishing, camping, any of those things are all kind of relevant to being comfortable in the outdoors and learning about your environment and again, how to identify these species, and all of that certainly helps lead into kind of easing that first step into a career in fisheries.
And volunteering also.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places where you can volunteer, like your local conservation authority, or even universities. I'm sure they're always looking for people to help out, and that would give you a really good idea of whether this is something you would like to do.
Yeah, that's important. So making sure that you find what you're passionate about, getting that hands-on experience, like you said, boating, camping, getting to know the different kinds of fish, and then pursuing an education if this is the path that you want to follow in that environmental science and biology. Excellent. Lots for us to think about. Thank you. And our next question that's come through here, will control have to be ongoing forever for this type of fish?
That's a good question. I guess that's something we're still learning, right? And so that's really why we're focused with the program on grass carp has arrived in the Great Lakes, the others have not. And so we want to make sure that they don't arrive, and so that we're not into that stage of dealing with an invasive species. So our goal is always eradication, so removing them completely. And at that point, you're not into control. So again, focus number one is don't let them arrive in the first place. So that's how you really avoid getting into that continued, loop of control.
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to add is that when a species has already arrived and established, it takes a lot more effort and also a lot more money. It actually costs 100 times more to control a population or a species that has already arrived compared to just preventing it in the first place. So that's one of the reasons why we want to focus on that.
That makes sense. Much easier to prevent something than try to clean up a mess after.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Well, we've learned a lot. Before we sign off, is there anything else that either of you wanted to share about the Canada Centre for Inland Waters or about your work?
I think in my case, I mean, I didn't even know this was a job before I got to university. So, I mean, I was thrilled to find that out. So I'm excited to be able to share that with people earlier on, before they're even thinking career-wise that this could be an option for them, right? And obviously the Federal Student Work Experience Program is something hopefully people will keep in the back of their minds to apply for as they get towards that, college or university if they decide to go that route. And yeah, I mean, there are lots of other things going on at the Canada Centre for Inland Water too. There's lots of interest in science and surveillance work underway, and we do every so often have open houses as well. So that's something to keep in mind, that there may be opportunities in the future to come and see what other things are going on and to visit the center. So I don't have any dates in mind, but just it may happen again. So keep an ear out for that.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you both so much for hosting us and letting us see the electro fishing and the inside of the lab and talking about these fish and your own work. It's really been a great learning experience for me, and I know for the classes and the communities that are tuning in as well. So a big thank you to both of you, and thanks everybody for joining us. And we will see everyone online tomorrow. Take care, everybody.